when we start feeling better, we just can't stop. You get addicted to feeling good. And then the whole idea of buying another slice of pizza or doing takeout from a Chinese takeout where you don't know what the hell they're putting in the food, it just becomes gross because I will ask myself on a regular basis, like, what do you need? And the body will tell me. And so, like I said, we get addicted to feeling good. And just listening to that and honoring that is my biggest thing right now.
That's Magdalena Wszelaki, and this is episode 215 of Wellness Force Radio. What's up, my friend? It's your host, Josh Trent, and welcome back to another episode for your weekly access to global experts in all things wellness as we discover the physical and emotional intelligence we need to live life well. In this podcast, we're talking about hormones and cooking, which at first glance could be deemed as separate silos. But as you'll learn on this special edition Physical Intelligence podcast, that cooking for hormone balance has a direct impact on healing a compromised immune system, supporting better digestion. And by the end of the show today, you'll have a higher level of intelligence with some actionable things you can do as soon as you're done listening to the podcast that'll give you a true starting point to set this clear path for understanding how to balance your own hormones. If you're experiencing brain fog, weight gain, digestive issues, this podcast is brought to you today for clarity by our partners at IntelliSkin.net, which is actually so perfect for today's show because the foods that we eat are just as important as the breaths that we breathe. And from these last 200 shows plus, we understand that if we're not breathing correctly, our wellness can suffer. But most people don't realize that posture is actually the number one factor in taking proper breaths, as well as our body's natural systems functioning well. If your shoulders are pulled back and you're breathing through your belly and through your diaphragm and your nose, research has shown that belly breathing, specifically nostril breathing, has the potential to lower stress by 30% or more throughout the day. And you could do this easily now by getting a tactile response reminder from this technology, this smart compression. It's something that I learned about last year from Dr. Tim Brown, the co-medical director for the North American World Surf League. We interviewed him on episode 137, where he talked about this smart compression, this human technology. It's a top, a garment for men and women that you wear either as a standalone workout shirt, but there's also travel and undershirts that you can wear as well that will literally give you a tactile response so you can pull your shoulders back so you can stop slumping and stand tall. Give this human technology smart compression a test drive over at IntelliSkin.net. Use code WF20 for 20% off your test drive to pull your shoulders back. Use code WF20 at IntelliSkin.net. And once you're breathing correctly, then it comes to the food that we eat so we can start feeling and living well. Magdalena is going to share with us the different types of symptoms men and women can be experiencing when they have hormone imbalances, estrogen dominance, why it's one of the easiest hormone imbalances to undo and its relation to our thyroid function, how cleaning products, these toxic cleaning products, can be disrupting our neurotransmitters, the purpose of doing an elimination diet as a first step to eliminate problematic inflammatory foods, how Magdalena revamped her diet, skincare, community, and lifestyle to heal her own health conditions, to now lead a community across the world doing the same. We also got practical on this show. When you're traveling, when you're making dinner, what do you actually do to promote healthy hormones? Magdalena believes that the real healing comes when we address both the physical and the emotional hurt, and our gut and hormone health comes after that. Show notes from today are at wellnessforce.com/215. Share this podcast with a friend or a family member, somebody who maybe is at work that needs support in what they're working on in their wellness. And over the next 30 days, if you personally are calling in support for your own wellness journey, you're struggling with something, you're working on more energy, you're letting go of weight, I want to talk to you on the phone. I want to learn about what you are personally struggling with in a 20-minute call over the next month for a limited time. For the first 20 people that sign up for a 20-minute call, I will pick your brain. You get to pick my brain for an ultimate Q&A. I want to learn about you in this conversation so I can understand how we can grow this community and I can serve this community deeper and more practically. And also together, how we can become wellness warriors. That's what this world needs right now. It takes a wellness warrior to live our life well in this world. It's not set up. Our current environment is not set up for us to be emotionally and physically intelligent and healthy. It takes a wellness warrior like you to create that. So let's jump on the phone for a 20-minute call where I can support you. Just go to wellnessforce.com/call. The first 20 people that sign up, I cannot wait to connect with you. I want to know how I can help you the most. wellnessforce.com/call for all my fellow wellness warriors out there. Now let's jump in with certified nutrition coach and founder of Hormones Balance, Magdalena Wszelaki. Magdalena Wszelaki, the nutrition expert and founder of Hormones Balance, a nutrition practice that teaches women how to rebalance their hormones with nourishing food. But what's really fascinating about Magdalena is that she became a Cooking for Hormones Balance global leader in educating women and men about the power of food for their healing. Yet most people don't know that her mother actually hated to cook. She learned about this so much in her own path. Magdalena, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I loved the piece that you picked up from the whole book.
Yes. You know, this book, it's just this beautiful guidebook for people to balance their hormones. Food, it's such a powerful piece of the wellness wheel. You know, we talk about this on the show so much. Today, we're focused on the physical intelligence, our eating, our moving, our sleeping. And in this eating category, a lot of people don't know that when hormones are off, it doesn't necessarily even matter what you're eating until you address the underlying cause. And we're going to dive into that today. Now, I want to learn a little bit more about you live on the show, though. You're in Boulder, but something tells me you're not originally from Boulder. Where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I was born to Polish parents. However, my father had an expatriate job, and so we bounced around the world. That's why it's kind of hard to pin my accent, and it can change depending who I talk to. But you know, I spent most of my life in Asia, and so very formative years, like age 15 till I was 32. And that really impacted how I look at food, because in Asia, food often is used. There's a very thin line between where medicine begins and where food ends, you know?
In Asia, their food quality is probably incredible compared to the general school systems that we see here. Would you say that's true?
Very much so. And, you know, with a little caveat that things are changing. You know, in China, with a single child policy, you're beginning to see obese children, which China had never seen before. So it's changing, but you're right that there is still a lot of great options, definitely better than what we have here.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me because so many people that write in, you know, they have children, they're caring for young boys, young girls, and the number one thing that I hear is I can't necessarily take care of them when they're away from my home. If there's Cheetos, if there's unhealthy food at schools, if they're at parties, whatever it is. Let's save some time in our upcoming conversation to talk about a parent's role in structuring, you know, eating habits for the child when they're not at home. Let's dive into Cooking for Hormone Balance. This is a practical guide. This is a practical program. 125 recipes. Are these all handwritten? Did they all come from Magdalena's brain?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
These
totally.
recipes, they're all in alignment with healthy hormone balance. But, you know, we could go so many different directions today. I'm excited to. Let's just start 30,000 feet, though. When we look at commonalities between symptoms, what are some of these that are aligned with hormone imbalances? Let's start with a high-level view of maybe a handful of symptoms that women could be experiencing when they're having hormone imbalance.
Yeah, so you know what, I think, Josh, that's a really great question. That's such an important question, because I think most women have an inkling that something is going on. You know, when we have things like PMS or infertility going on, or when we are sliding into perimenopause, where our periods are just, you know, where the word normal doesn't apply for, you know, for those few years. We'll be sliding into menopause and we walk into a room and forgetting why we walked in there. I think most women have a pretty good understanding that the hormones are at play here, right? But there's a whole host of other symptoms that we don't particularly connect to hormones, because the common, you know, the pop culture, if you will, hasn't done that. Doctors don't talk to us about it. And that was part of the inspiration to create the book. So let's just dive into some very specific ones. You know, the way we look. So everything from, for example, storing fat around our hips or carrying it around the belly could be specific hormonal imbalances, like, you know, for example, the woman who's a pear who just cannot lose that weight around her thighs and butt is that's typically estrogen dominance. And we can talk about that condition later. You know, somebody who's storing a lot of fat around her belly, that's a typical metabolic issue that's caused oftentimes by high sugar levels, high insulin, high testosterone levels in women, right? You know, speaking of how we look, the quality of our hair, which is such a big deal for a woman, right, can be dictated by, for example, by the thyroid. The fact that we can have facial hair growing on our chins or nipples, or, you know, which is so devastating for so many women, that can also be due to hormonal imbalances. Quality of our skin, you know, like, for example, skin that starts to sag and we're beginning to lose muscle, right? That can be due to estrogen dominance, low estrogen, or low testosterone levels. But, also mental stuff. So how sharp are we? Foggy brain, forgetfulness, right? Or on the contrary, will be good memory. How sharp we are in our thinking. But also how optimistic and how much of a positive outlook we have on our lives can also be dictated largely by hormones, something that a lot of women don't realize, like things like depression, anxiety, foggy brain can be due to a whole different host of different hormonal imbalances.
Yeah, I know so many people are probably raising their hand or they're driving in their car and they're nodding their head because depression, foggy brain, skin issues, fat storage around the waist and hips, and even hair. I was talking with a friend yesterday and she was telling me when her hormones were off, her hair was actually coming out in the shower. It was freaking her out. It was like hair in the drain. So let's talk about the hair specifically. When we look at your work, and we're also going to dive into your story. I know you've had an incredible story, Magdalena, of overcoming your own health issues. But when we look at the hair coming out, what typically is that? What are they missing and what do they need?
Yeah, so hair is interesting because it's not, it's not just a cosmetic thing. Some women will be like, oh, I'm just so, I don't want to be pedantic or be, overly concerned about my look. But it's really a sign something is going on. So if it's a hormonal problem, because, it can be due to toxicity or low vitamin B12 levels or low biotin. There could be a host of different issues with hair. But from a hormonal perspective, it's typically the thyroid. And when we have a low thyroid function, the hair starts falling out, and it generally tends to be all around and especially on the sides of the head. And if a woman is balding right in the middle, like the crown kind of balding, we call it, it's almost like a patch that starts developing. That's oftentimes due to high testosterone levels in women. And oftentimes women who lose their hair and on the crown, they also begin to grow hair in the very unwanted places, like the upper lips, chins, nipples, etc.
Yeah, that is not a popular place. No one wants that to happen. I'm curious, can we talk about the high testosterone then? Because in my mind, I would think, okay, with more testosterone, maybe the hair would actually be thicker and fuller, but that actually can cause an imbalance where the hair falls out on the head and grows other places.
Yeah. So, the word is balance, right? We don't want to have too much or too little of any hormone. And even as women, we need testosterone. And you guys, you need some level of estrogen as well. So it's not like, that we don't need any of those hormones. The question here is of balance. And with women, testosterone, high testosterone typically happens when we have high blood sugar levels. So, that's your typical fasting glucose, when you go and see your doc, is going to be on the high side, or the marker that I prefer to use is called HA1C. That's much more accurate in blood sugar levels. And women like that tend to have elevated blood sugar levels, which then what happens is there is a hormone called sex hormone binding globulin. Just bear with me here for a second, but I just want to show you how it's all connected, on a biochemical level. The sex hormone binding globulin will be very, very low when we have blood sugar levels, and hence it doesn't bind the testosterone. So that woman like that would have so much of testosterone, in her body that will result in that halo, as I was talking about, and the unwanted hair. But it's not just the hair. Let me just kind of look back just for 1 second about the symptoms, because I think it was such an important question you asked. And I want to talk about some of the symptoms that are really very, very disturbing. And a lot of women don't realize that that's due to hormonal imbalances. High testosterone, for example, can also be causing things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the leading cause of infertility in this country. And doctors give us then horrendous medications that do a lot of destruction to the liver and our gut in order to control that symptom. Or they put us on birth control pills, which has got its own set of side effects, most of them very negative, and especially in the long term. But, Josh, even things like fibrocystic breast or breast lumps, which almost every woman who I know had either a fibrocystic breast or a lump on her boob at some point in her life. And I can tell you that, and I'm sure you know this, for having women in your life, that is is the scariest moment in your life when you find that lump, right? And, it's just a whole confusion about how do I get it diagnosed, and, who do I go and see? And you get scared by the medical institutions, right? And then guess what? Fibrocystic breast and lump on our breast, most of the time, are caused by a condition called estrogen dominance, which is one of the easiest hormonal imbalances to undo. And, if you wish, we can talk about that later. But also things like breast cancers. 90% of breast cancers in this country, and mind you, 1 in 7 women will get breast cancer in this country, which is the highest that we've ever seen. And it's not going away, by the way. Our diagnostics are getting better, but the condition itself isn't getting any better. Most of women's breast cancers, Josh, are estrogen dominance. We call it estrogen receptor positive breast cancers, which are due to estrogen dominance, again, as a condition. The fastest growing cancer in the country is a thyroid cancer. And it's not, most of them, they don't metastasize, but, most of people will lose their thyroid, right? They're going to get a full thyroidectomy, and they're going to lose their thyroid, which means that you're dependent on hormone medication for the rest of your life, right?
Okay, what is going on? It seems like there's a cascade of cancer rising, not just with thyroid, but with breast and everything else. And if we trace it back, Magdalena, it really comes down to the foods that we eat and the emotional state that we're in. This is really powerful, because I almost want to ask this big question of, like, what are we eating? Is it the plastic in the foods? Is it the phytoestrogens when people pop something into the microwave? Like, what's really going on when we look at estrogen's role in these types of cancers?
Yeah, so we like to point things to one thing, right? And the truth of that, Josh, is that there isn't one thing. But you mentioned many of them. It's a lot of times is the perfect storm, right? Is the contribution of a number of different things all happening at the same time. Starting off with genetic predispositions, and I want to just stress the word predisposition. It means that you're inheriting a loaded gun, but something needs to still pull the trigger, right? And pulling the trigger. So just to give you an example, like I have all the genetic predispositions to be super, to have all the estrogenic cancers. So that will be breast, thyroid, ovarian, uterine cancer, all estrogenic cancer. And by the way, prostate in men, before I forget, because we talk about women a lot here, but a lot of women have partners and husbands who have prostate issues. And guess what? Prostate issues in men are due to estrogen dominance as well, right? And not to mention men boobs. Also estrogenic issues, right? Men
boobs are just as least popular as the hair on the lip for women. This is not what we want.
And I can tell you, men are beginning to get a lot of breast cancers now too. So, anyway, so to answer your question, yes, so it's a combination of how genetically predisposed, and you can get that done through like testing through 23andMe and then get somebody to interpret the results for you. Like you said, the xenoestrogen, xeno as in comes from Greek as in outside, external estrogens that come in from the mainstream brands of skincare products, cleaning stuff. You walk into, you see the brands that are advertised in all the major magazines and TV. Like those are the brands you just don't want to touch. That stuff is just loaded with chemicals that will be contributing towards estrogen dominance. But, looking also what we're what we're eating in is equally important. So, when you don't eat organic food, right, everything from the pesticides and fertilizers that we are using, all of that can be turned into the unbeneficial estrogens in the body. Lastly, but birth control pills, another humongous contributor. Another one, which a lot of us don't realize is stress. When we are stressed out, we produce cortisol. Cortisol steals progesterone in women. And progesterone is there to offset estrogen's work. So when we are depleted of estrogen, right, and just to give you an example, for instance, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will relate to this, and almost everyone I think knows somebody who experienced a family who's been trying to conceive for like 5-10 years, right?
Yeah.
And they just can't, and they do everything from Chinese herb to standing upside down and do IVFs and whatever. Nothing works, right? And then they give up, and then they go and adopt a child, right? And then boom, a year later she gets pregnant. Right. And that happens to a lot of adoptive families. And that is a classic case of somebody who was so stressed out for wanting to get pregnant no matter what. Right. That finally, when she falls in love and there's peace and love in the family, there's bonding, her hormones re-regulate and she has sufficient progesterone of her own then to conceive. And so that's a classic. And this is just a good example of how stress can also bring down our hormones just to a total, to destroy the balance in our body.
This is so cumulative. There's so many pieces to this thing too. And I want to connect a few dots because you've already shared so many gems here. We're talking about really this estrogen dominance factor, how that feeds into cancer. And then also, the stress aspect, how we're sleeping, if we're not repairing and restoring our brain health and our emotional health too. And so the plastics that we're putting in the microwave, that's just one piece of it here, whether it's plastic or sleep or these stress conditions, this is what's actually rising the estrogen in the body, correct?
That is correct. And I'm happy you mentioned stress. That's another, I wouldn't connect sleep directly to estrogen dominance per se, but put it this way, if you have especially things like issues with your adrenals, which are really the mother of all other hormones, and they can pull and support all other hormones all at the same time. When you're not sleeping sufficiently, or you're having poor quality sleep, you can't fall asleep, or you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're waking up tired, there is just no hormonal balance when we are sleep deprived, period. So that's another element here. But everything you mentioned, it's like I said at the beginning, it's this perfect storm. It isn't just one thing.
Yeah. This gut repair that you talk about in the book so much, there's incredible detail in this cooking for hormone balance. There's not just recipes for foods that'll help balance hormones. There's also your story. And there's these tactical, pragmatic, really nuts and bolts things. I think what confuses people so much, Magdalena, is they go, okay, I know the story, but tell me what to do when my feet are on the ground. Tell me what to do in the kitchen. Like, how do I do this on a day-by-day kind of step-by-step approach? You have this hormone foundation where you take someone through a gut healing guide and elimination diet, followed by the sugar balance, then liver detox, and then refining the hormone balance. I think so many people will go to a naturopath, they'll start doing sublingual drops, they'll start throwing a bunch of supplements into their body without ever addressing the gut first. Let's talk about the first step people take when they really see where they are in relation to these hormones and balancing with the gut.
I'm so impressed you actually read my book. So, yeah, no, you're right. And, and just in defense of naturopaths, and because I have a lot of friends who are in that space, a lot of times us as patients, we are to be blamed for tactical solutions or walking away with, 20 bottles of supplements, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, that's what people expect: instant results, instant healing. And naturopaths, so many of my friends who are naturopaths and integrative docs will say, if I ask my patients to change their diet, they're never going to come back. So, your listeners are in a sliver of the population who are actually willing to make any changes. And kudos to you for doing that, because it's going to pay off for the rest of your life. To me, doing things like sublingual, for example, B12 or whatever you're doing, right? It's a little bit like imagining when your house has a leaky roof, and the B12 is like a bit like having potpourri in a house, or slapping a bunch of paint on where the mold is developing on the wall.
Yes,
right?
I like where you're going with this metaphor. I love this.
Yeah. So what I have done is, having worked with so many women over the years, what I've realized that it's not about the DIM. DIM, for example, if you have estrogen dominance issue, a lot of docs integrative docs will give you DIM, methane, to help you metabolize estrogen better. And, and that can help. But if this person has got messed up digestion, chronic digestive issues, and let's talk about that in a second, and is living on sugar and coffee, right? That DIM can only go that far, and it might help maybe for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then it stops working or it just doesn't work at all, right? So that's what my experience has been. So when you lay the foundation, it's a little bit like when you're building a home, you want to have a strong foundation, because whatever you put on top, it just doesn't really matter, as long as the foundation is strong, right? And in the context of hormones, like you mentioned, the three bodily systems, and I use the analogy of a three-legged stool. If you want to sit comfortably on a three-legged stool, right, all the three legs need to be firmly in place. One of them is missing or is shorter, you start wobbling, you fall. In the context of hormones, it's the health of like you said, it's the health of your digestion, your sugar balance, and the liver's ability of detoxify you from various substances, including hormones. That's something that we don't realize, how powerful the liver is to actually help us to detoxify us from hormones to make space for new ones. So gut health is incredibly important. I mean, there's a whole chapter that's dedicated to that. It's just very on a high level. You start off with the elimination diet just to eliminate the potential trigger foods that could be highly inflammatory. And I showed their whole guide on what are the foods to remove, but that also, some people need to go a little bit deeper. Let me give you an example here, Josh. I think everybody knows that gluten and dairy might not be particularly complementary to a lot of people. They're highly inflammatory, unfortunately, to a lot of women. So if you want to cut them out, especially temporarily, just to heal up. But then you have also these very healthy foods, like, for example, sauerkraut, right? Or for some people, kombucha, avocado. Well, guess what? When you have different digestive issues going on, There's so many people, for example, now having histamine issues. They eat that sauerkraut and then they're like itching all over. They're getting anxiety attack. They can't sleep. They start getting allergies soon after, after having a bit of sauerkraut, right? And that's so what I teach in the first chapter in the digestion is to really how to restore your digestion so that you bring down the inflammation, the chronic systemic inflammation in the body. And the importance of it is that, your cells, in order to receive the hormones into the cell, into the receptor of the cell, they cannot be inflamed. When they're inflamed, and this is the reason, when they're inflamed, that hormone just doesn't come in and do the work, to give you this beautiful hair and ability of losing weight and be sharp in the head and having a lot of great energy and to play around with the kids. All of that comes from the hormones doing their work. But when you're inflamed, it's just, the inflammation is like a natural blocker. And what I have found is that, we do all these like, oh, I'm going to do my omega-3s and fish oils and this and that. While you're eating inflammatory foods, you're constantly adding fuel to the fire, right? So that's why, the whole cookbook is free of gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, corn. I also remove nightshade vegetables, so things like peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, and I'm not demonizing these foods, by the way, by any means, at least not all of them. For example, eggs are a good example. They can be a friend, can they also be a foe? 50% of women I have found I've worked with in the past had a problem with eggs, but completely without realizing that. So, that's really the starting point. And what I have seen, Josh, is that a lot of times when we take care of our digestion first, so many things, not just hormones, but just overall our entire, body and energy and our weight and everything responds so well that we don't oftentimes even need to do anything else.
This is such a great point. I love your analogy, by the way. If you're leaky, if you have a roof that's leaky, it doesn't matter if you have potpourri in the bathroom. Like that's what's happening when there is people and they're doing great things. I'm also not knocking naturopaths or anyone who's trying to help other people. But I think what gets skipped over is this more sometimes complicated. I think that's why people don't want to address it. Healing of the gut can take 1 to 3 months. Gosh, even 6 to 12 months, right? Like healing the gut takes time. That's why you have an entire guide through this elimination diet protocol in your book. So we look at the foods like gluten, like dairy, even soy. And then for some people, they can't have peppers or certain things that are nightshade components. This process though, it's typically around a month, right? Like a reset portion of 30 days. How many days do you recommend when people actually do this protocol for removing the possible inflammatory causing foods?
Yeah, so 4 weeks is a good starting point. And from experience, people end up doing 6 to 8 weeks just because they feel so good that a lot of times they just even have a lot of the fear to introduce some of these foods because they have a memory of just how crappy they used to feel. Pains, aches, foggy brain, can't sleep, anxiety attacks. People have those memories. And suddenly when all these things go away just from doing the elimination diet, our PMSs improve, like women don't have PMSs anymore when they stop eating gluten or dairy. It's quite unbelievable. And so, so to answer your question, 4 weeks is the minimal. And if you really want to kind of like heal and seal your gut, so to speak, then doing it to 6 to 8 weeks is probably best.
6 to 8 weeks would be maybe a more optimal window. And we look at some of the work of Robb Wolf and David Perlmutter and people that are colleagues of yours, that are really allowing men and women to just slow down. Magdalena, don't you think really what you're also teaching is for us to take a well-deserved deep breath and just to be more still and understand that when we make these conscious decisions about our foods and really start tuning in to what our body is telling us. I mean, look, all the wisdom is within. You went through a massive period in your life where you had rashes on your back. You couldn't even wear clothes that were open. You had to wear covering clothes. There was a lot of emotional things you're experiencing because of these physical symptoms. It was only until, and I'd love for you to share your story here, it was only until you slowed down and started really paying attention to what you were eating, to what you were putting in this beautiful body that you had. Take us through that story because I think a lot of people will connect with you.
Yeah. So, Josh, a lot of times people ask me and I think this is one of the most powerful questions a person can ask herself or himself. And this is, I would ask our listeners as well here today, if you were to give yourself, some kind of health advice 10 years ago, what would that be?
Slow down. Slow down.
Yeah, and especially living in the United States, it's almost unheard of, right? I mean, we laugh about the Europeans and the siestas and 2-month vacations and that kind of thing, but there's a good reason behind it. In my case, the health advice I would have given myself 10 years ago, and I did accept it to some degree, was to really tune into and listen to what my body's trying to tell me, because my body has been slowly shutting down for a long time. But because I was living a very high life and working in advertising and, so I used to basically work for an advertising agency living in China at that point when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2008. And I still remember going to see the doc, and she was the conventional allopathic doc. And she looked at, and one of my chief complaints was that I was experiencing severe fatigue and brain fog. And she turned my file around and she says, "You're 36 years old. Of course you're tired."
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And here I am living in Shanghai, which sees, people in their 80s and 90s doing Tai Chi along the river at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, you kidding me? So anyway, this is when I realized that something is really wrong. When I started researching, and realized that Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease. And that means that my own body is confused and is beginning to kill its own cells. That's when I realized this is not right. This is like, what have I done? What is going on in my body that kind of self-destruction has begun to happen? And mind you, in 2008, we did not have the kind of resources that we have today. I mean, today today we kind of go on the other side of the spectrum. If you look at Hashimoto's, I mean, there are probably 20 books today on Hashimoto's, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Which can also be confusing because different people have different approaches. And so anyway, quite frankly, I think my health really kind of started off on the wrong foot right from the beginning. To start off with, I have genetics that are horrible. I mean, if you just look at my printout of my genetics, I literally have red boxes almost in I would say a third of the genes, which basically means I have double mutations on them, which means that they compromise a normal functioning person to a very, very large degree. When I went to see my naturopathic doctor here in Boulder, when I had a first session with her, and she said to me, "Have you ever had breast cancer?" I said, "Well, why would you ask me that?" And she said, "Well, just women in their late 40s, the way you are, you're a perfect candidate for having that. In fact, most women I see with your kind of genetics would have had estrogenic cancers like breast cancer by now, right?" And I think the only reason why I don't is because I take care of myself. So genetics is one thing, but it's also having been born to a mother who bought into the 1970s idea that mother's milk is less beneficial than powdered milk. So I was a powdered milk baby. I was never breastfed. Ended up in a hospital already in the first month with pneumonia, pumped with antibiotics, right? So right from the beginning, having no good bacteria, and then whatever good bacteria I had, pretty much all of that got wiped out.
Wow. I want to pause there too. And I want to just, sorry to interrupt you here, because this is really, really powerful. I think I look at the way that you just went over, I was actually raised on powdered milk in the beginning rather than the natural breast milk. I look at my own life. I look at other people's lives, Magdalena, like yours, that in those first 3 years of living from conception to maybe 3 to 7 years old, it's so important that we have a primal way of being cared for, of eating. And it sounds like you weren't. And this happens with babies that are born cesarean. They don't get the natural chemicals and estrogens from the placenta, from the mother's birth. Looking back, do you feel like this is where it all began for you? The issues that you've had as an adult and all the things you went through, was it because you didn't have that primal upbringing?
Absolutely. And, and a direct comparison to this will be my sister, who my mother kind of regained her wisdom to some degree, and my sister was a breastfed baby. She didn't have any of the problems that I did. And so immune system weak right from the get-go, right? Like I mentioned, pneumonia, and then covered in eczema, which is also actually a form of an autoimmune response. Covered as a child, chronic ear infections and sinus infections. Josh, I don't remember much when I was 5, but I do remember being taken to the hospital for ear drainage because I had so much pus in the ears.
Yeah.
And then later that became cystic acne, constant migraines, terrible PMSs, constantly bloated in the tummy, right? So, and then finally I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2018. So I think it was just a final blow that my body's just been bashed up so badly. And also just before I was diagnosed, living in China was one of the most exhilarating experiences. Just really, I mean, being in Shanghai was just the highlight of my life, really. But it was also a time of, a lot of alcohol. I never did drugs, right? But I smoked, and being up at 5 o'clock in the morning to hit the gym because I was a semi-professional athlete and I had a sponsorship for my team, and we did adventure races. And so
wait, you were smoking and doing adventure races?
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
I pulled it off and we did pretty well. I don't know. I think you just hit the gym and just continue doing it.
You're such a different person now, looking back on what you've been through. What did you garner the most then? I mean, coming from this non-primal way of being, Rose, your mom did the best she could. And by the way, our parents always do the best they can.
Yes.
They're just dealing with the information they have at hand.
Yes.
Coming from this non-primal upbringing to then smoking and adventure races and going through all the health issues and thresholds you have compared to who you are now and who you serve now. What did you learn the most about yourself? What did you think you needed back then?
So, like you said, about the slowing down, I resigned from my job, and soon after, like once I got the diagnosis and I understood what was going on, kind of, right? I just felt like if I continue living in China in a toxic, and this was 2008, this is the year of the Olympics, right? So in the US, you guys probably saw the photos of the pollution, right, and the dirty rivers and all that, which is all true. There was no media manipulation. That living in there, I can tell you, like, you just never knew what the hell you were putting in your body, right? So I knew that I needed to get out of that, and I was so glad that I listened to that advice. That little that little voice that was saying, get the hell out of here. And this is when I moved to the United States with another job, took a huge pay cut and, stepped down from a regional job to like being almost a support staff.
Yeah, but you also saved your life.
Oh, totally. I mean, in China, we sold the agency and we had a 2-year payout. I only took like 20% of what was owed to me, and I resigned. And my boss was like, are you crazy? Like, this can set you up for life. And I'm like, the money that I'm going to get in 2 years' time is going to go towards my medical bills just to save my life. So absolutely. I got out of there. And, so I think the elimination diet, just immediately embarking on anti-inflammatory lifestyle, which included getting off all the foods that I talked about, detoxification, living in a place like I moved to Seattle, right? So that was pretty easy, nice, clean environment. And took a significantly slower job. I stopped traveling. I was in a regional job. I was constantly on a plane. So I was covering Asia, right? So I was on a plane 2 times a week, flying somewhere.
Yeah.
And you live off hotel food and crappy airport food, right? So that, just cooking for yourself and having control what you put in the body. Changed my entire skincare regimen completely. Nothing that you can see in advertised in television, that's for sure. Smaller brands, learned how to make my own things. Simplifying things, just really, really slowing down. Started doing meditation. I went to do a meditation. They call it a retreat, but it was more like a boot camp, silent meditation for a month in India. So, just a whole combination of things, and surrounding myself with really supportive community of people who are very like-minded.
Yes.
I'll be honest with you, today I don't have a lot of friends from my advertising days. We live very different lifestyle. They probably think it's a little bit too of a radical change for them.
Why is Magdalena floating wearing a white cape? Right. So I'm thinking about this journey, and thank you so much for sharing this journey. You talked about it in the book as well, in Cooking for Hormone Balance. You actually said that your mom hated to cook, and your grandmother made food that was so bland you would like eat the spinach and then go run to the bathroom and spit it out. But you also mentioned, and this is a big take home for so many millions of Americans and really people across the world, you said you learned how to cook because you had to, so you could save your life and your sanity. And I think that's honestly what is one of the biggest gems from this conversation, Magdalena. So many people, so many women are not cooking. They're not cooking at home. They're not actually making their food. The majority of their food comes from packages and containers and bins, and they're wondering why the estrogen dominance is such an issue and why cancer is rising. How do we do this then? This is a really big question. How do we get people to cook more and to enjoy the cooking process?
Yeah. So, I think first of all, I think this is a 2-prong approach. One is the realization that, it's funny in the United States, everybody continuously talks about Europe and aspires to Europe. So if you want to use another aspiration point, let me tell you, Europeans cook. Europeans go food shopping at least twice a week, where in America, people go shopping twice a month, only because we buy so many packaged foods. And I suspect your audience probably is not like that, because otherwise they wouldn't be listening to your show. But the point is, like, for those people who don't like to shop, first of all, when you do, if you can just give yourself the opportunity to do so just for a couple of weeks, and embark on this anti-inflammatory diet that I talk about in the book, you will, when we start feeling better, we just can't stop. You get addicted to feeling good. And then the whole idea of buying another slice of pizza from a corner deli, or doing takeout from a Chinese takeout where you don't know what the hell they're putting in the food, it just becomes gross, because then you start burping. And then your anxiety comes back, and you're feeling so fatigued, and you're feeling like really yucky in your tummy. And so, like I said, we get addicted to feeling good. So if you can just give yourself the permission to try this for a couple of weeks. That's the first thing. The second thing is, starting off with really simple recipes. They taste really, really good. Josh, one of the big things I remember when I was one of the very few people when I was living in New York who would actually cook and invite friends over, because New York is such a go out culture, right? And and I didn't quite like a lot of the food in New York at that, back then, 7-8 years ago. The focus in New York was more in like where the chef came from, and all these accolades that he had, rather than asking the question, where's the food coming from? Like, what am I putting in my body, right? Something that's so different, for example, in California or Colorado. So, and whenever I have a dinner party at my house, the constant remark that I was always getting was, oh my God, I can't believe it's so healthy. It was so quick for you to make this. It's so simple, but it tastes so good. And that's, that's really a big shift, because a lot of times we think that healthy means a boring raw kale salad with like
right. It doesn't have to suck. Yeah.
Drizzle of olive oil and like 2 drops of lemon. No, it doesn't have to be that way. I personally don't even like kale. So so there you have it, Yeah. And if you look at my recipes, Josh, it's like so many of them have under 30 minutes. So many of them use no more than 5 ingredients. So many of them are don't require cooking, but more putting things together. And I'm playing around a lot with ingredients that can sit in the fridge for a significant amount of time, like fermented foods, for example, or certain things that are healthy can't. You can just open it up and put them together, so it doesn't require cooking. So bottom line is, surround yourself with simple, yummy recipes that really require, you can pull it off in 20 minutes. Batch cooking is another great idea, right? Spend, 4 hours on a Sunday, just cook up a storm, have it till like Wednesday, Thursday.
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned batch cooking. We're going to talk about that in an upcoming show. And this batch cooking, it's like making a little bit more food so you can eat healthy later. Proactivity around our self-love, it starts way before we get home from a travel and we're exhausted and there's nothing. It really begins weeks in advance. Give people maybe some tactical tools they can do when they're traveling. How do you personally address this, Magdalena, when you travel? I'm sure you travel quite a bit. How do you prepare for when you come back home from a trip?
So, when I get home, I just hit, the health store and just get my supplies. But can I give you an example of like what I do when I travel? Because that's the hard part.
Oh, yeah. This is the hard part. Please.
Right. So, Josh, the big thing that I do is like, I'm wrapping up a book launch in the tour, right? And I was on the road for the past 2 months. And the big thing is, first of all, I would always rent an Airbnb to make sure there is a kitchen or kitchenette in it, right? Go to the local, now Whole Foods almost in every city delivers, right? So a lot of times, like if I don't have a car, I would just get it delivered. They do it within 2 hours. So there's no excuse not to. It's called Instacart, right? Just pick whatever you want. And a lot of times I don't have time to cook. So one of my favorite recipes that's also in the cookbook is called Farmer's Wife's Breakfast. That's my absolute go-to when I travel. So can I describe it, Josh, just quickly, what it is?
Yes, give us the dirty details. Well, actually, they sound like clean details.
Okay. So the Farmer's Wife's Breakfast is paleo. So it's, what I'll do is the base of the Farmer's Wife's Breakfast is a bed of greens, because you want to get the greens in. And I love to work with cruciferous vegetables. So cruciferous vegetables will be things like, arugula or mizuna or broccoli sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, right? All the cabbages, are cruciferous veggies, and they are hugely supportive towards the liver. They help with liver detoxification, but they also help you to clear those estrogens that are causing these problems that we talked about earlier with you. So I'll put that. So I love arugula because it's a crucifer, and I just love the taste of it. And then I'll drizzle it with just a little bit of olive oil and perhaps lime or lemon juice, right? So that's the kind of like a dressing for the salad. And then what I'll do is having on a side a piece of protein. Really, really important to have some protein first thing in the morning. So you stabilize your blood sugar levels. And so when I travel, like I said, I don't have time to cook. So typically I'll do a piece of smoked salmon, or I will do, I'll just buy a roasted chicken and have a piece of chicken on the side. And then I'll do a slice of some avocado, right? So it gives you the good fat and gives you the sustenance. And then do a little bit of sauerkraut or kimchi on the side, right? So you've got the fermented foods going on, supportive for your gut microbiome, for the good bacteria, for the gut, right? And you know what, maybe I'll sprinkle it with some flaxseed. So flaxseed is one of the huge estrogen detoxifiers. It helps it brings in good estrogens, and it helps you to detoxify you from the bad estrogens. And that's that. You see what I mean? Like, it's not even cooking. This literally takes you 5 minutes to put this together on a plate. And, and food is ready.
Plus, it's making me really hungry, too. I'm like visualizing this plate of food. Now, I noticed, Magdalena, though, you didn't really have too much starch on the plate. Why is that?
Yeah, so, because I love to do starch like later in the day. The things like, for example, sweet potato, it helps us to stabilize our blood sugar levels, actually, funny enough, towards at night. And so I prefer to be working with starches later in the night. But, if you can always add that in. If somebody wants to have a piece of sweet potato, they can always add that in. There's nothing wrong with that. The idea behind what I'm describing, the kind of breakfast, is in my book. It's called the PFF kind of breakfast: protein, fat, and fiber. So protein, fat, fiber, rich breakfast. And, Josh, I've lived in 7 different countries. I've traveled to over 40. And one of the big takeaways is that when people are really healthy, one of the globally, what you will see in the healthy eating countries and where people really thrive, people never ever eat sweet stuff for breakfast. Yeah, and that's uniform. Right. Whether you go to Ethiopia, you go to Japan, or you travel to Peru. If you talk about like traditional diets, no one ever eats sweet stuff for breakfast. They would do some carbohydrates.
And America came out with the Pop-Tart.
Yep.
Which is not funny. It's actually sad, and that's why I'm laughing at it, because sometimes I used to get so worked up, Magdalena. When I started Wellness Force, I was so angry at the way things were. And we've been talking about how to design the plate and how to structure the plate with, I love this, by the way, protein, fiber, and fat. This is a rich breakfast. But
I tell you, when women eat this way, when people eat this, and this is husbands as well, by the way, what I've been, what women report is that they feel first of all, they stop craving coffee, sugar. So immediately your calories, I don't care, to be honest with you, calories, but I do care about if your calories are coming from, sugar and snacks, just because at 11 o'clock your energy dips. And we need something sweet to pick us up, so to speak, right? When you have a breakfast like that, you don't snack until lunchtime. You have a lot sustained energy throughout the day. There is no cravings. There is no, women feel so focused on grounded, like none of the airy sort of, anxious kind of thoughts rambling around. And the best part is, Josh, one of the women said to me once, who transitioned, and she was like the biggest opponent of this, right? She's like, I want my fruit. I want my oatmeal in the first thing in the morning. And I said to her, just try it for 3 days, please, and just tell me how it goes. She was a private client many years ago. And she became the biggest advocate of this. And she said to me, Magdalena, in order to change my nights, I had to change my breakfast. And it was so powerful because she got off sleeping pills just from doing nothing else but changing her breakfast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, this goes back to what we talked about too with this proactive self-care. You plan before you travel. As soon as you get home, you're not going to just go home and lay down and then order something that's unhealthy. You're going to go to the grocery store. It's taking this ownership. It's what I'm hearing from you. And there's some strategies in your book about this. It's taking loving ownership of your food, of your state, of your body, of you. Like, that's why we're here on the planet. And so I want to ask this question then, when it comes to the timing of this for people that are experiencing hormone imbalances. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting for people that are currently experiencing a hormone imbalance? Is intermittent fasting a good idea?
So, it's an interesting question, right? Because depending on who you ask, whether it's Robb Wolf or the paleo community, the keto community, right? They're so down for intermittent fasting. So my take on it is I always defer to the concept of bioindividuality. We all differ from each other. I find that a lot of the studies and the anecdotal evidence comes from men and not necessarily women. And we have to remember that hormonally speaking, we are two such totally different animals. I mean, you really want to just, say it as plainly as that. We are different animals.
I love the way you put that. Yes, we are.
And so intermittent fasting, I have found, especially for women, for example, who have a lot of adrenal issues going on, problems with blood sugar control, their intermittent fasting just does not work. And especially combining that with coffee, no matter how much butter fat you want to put into it, is just, you just have to listen to your body. And look, here's the thing. Just, anyone should try it for a couple of weeks, maybe even 3 days. Just do it for 3 days. And just listen to your body. Your body will tell you if it agrees or if it doesn't. You start getting shaky, unfocused. Josh, I can't do intermittent fasting to save my life. I just can't, but I can fast. For example, in my case, what I do is I do my own different version of it, which is I don't do food after 6 p.m. 3 times a week, right? So I would just have dinner at 5. So kind of everything settles by 6. From that point on, I don't eat anything until the following morning breakfast, late breakfast, 10 o'clock. So, and that makes me feel good. And going to sleep with an empty tummy, it actually will give you a lot better quality sleep, and it releases the liver from having to do so much work. So overall, I'm not a fan, but, I see that working a lot, really much better for men than it does for women. But hey, I think everybody should try it.
I think so. And we all get to go down this path of self-experimentation. Currently, as we're interviewing here, I've been doing intermittent fasting where I've been skipping breakfast. I just interviewed Aubrey Marcus about this. And I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to try it. I don't need to download it in a guide or read it on a PDF. Like you're saying, Magdalena, we get to try these things. And speaking of trying something, I want to save just 1 minute here to talk about adrenal fatigue and really actually diving into the unprocessed emotions, trying to look at the things that are causing us stress. You talk about this in your chapter on adrenal healing, the adrenal healing guide. You mentioned stress originating from past or present physical exertion, emotional distress, or also unresolved trauma. This can be just as powerful as digestive issues. How do people actually turn their head and look at these emotional traumas? How do they do that? What's the starting process?
So by the way, this is not an area of my expertise at all, but what I will share with you is that, when I work with people who have changed a lot of things around their life in order to recover, to support the adrenals in their recovery, meaning, they modify their diet to support it. They follow the guide that I have in the book, right? They religiously get off coffee. They go to sleep early, right? And yet they display all the symptoms of adrenal, they do all that, say, supplements and, and take vitamin C and they on magnesium and all that good stuff, right? And things just things aren't just moving in the right direction, as expected. For 6 months, 8 months, they're still suffering from a lot of symptoms. And this is what I've discovered is that, when I would dig deeper into issues with my clients, this is where things will come out. Well, yeah, but I actually come from an alcoholic family, right? Or there was rape, or I witnessed my, somebody committing suicide, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And what I have discovered is only when they address that, this is when real healing really starts happening. And, some people there are some people who've been in horrible car accidents and they move on and it just doesn't affect them, right? And there's others who, just saw a dog being killed on the side of the road, and then that lingers on with them for the next 20 years. They're still blaming the father for not doing anything about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we all are, it's just, I think you would only know when you really address it. And there's so many beautiful modalities out there, whether it's EMDR or brain spotting or, somatic experiencing that releases that trauma and addresses that. And as a human body, as humans, we are so good at hiding these things because it's a natural protection mechanism, right? We forget a lot of times trauma. We bury that trauma so that we can function. The problem is that on the subconscious level, it can manifest with a lot of diseases. So you would only really know this when you start working with a really good practitioner.
Yes. And this is why I love the way your brain works, because this physical and emotional, there is such a bridge that connects the two of these. And I love how you've written about it in the book. We're going to link your book in the show notes, Cooking for Hormone Balance. I had a bunch more questions for you today, but I'm just going to ask you 5 ones really quickly, okay? The first one is Dr. Isabella Wentz. She wrote the foreword in your book. How has she impacted you?
Hugely. She is one of my biggest supporters, and she was the one. I never wanted to do a book. She said to me, you've got to do a book because you've got too much to say.
You recently had a hip replacement. It was a double, I believe. And then a few months later, you were out bouldering. What do you attribute to this? How'd you recover so quickly?
The lifestyle that I described in the book, totally anti-inflammatory, took care of all the different angles, went to the surgery with the best health ever.
We talk about physical intelligence on the show today specifically. What are you currently leaning into for your physical intelligence? In other words, do you have a new way of eating or moving or sleeping as a practice that you're currently working on?
Yes, I am working with somebody right now on looking deeper into my genetics to fine-tune my diet even further. I feel like I'm 90%. I want to feel 100%. And that's why genetics, I think, is going to be the next frontier.
Is it 23andMe or is it something else?
Oh, no, I'm working with somebody who interprets genetics and then aligns dietary changes based on the genetics.
This sounds like a smart person. We talk about emotional intelligence on the show quite a bit that you're currently walking on. So in other words, what are possibly thoughts or feelings or actions that you're currently aware of and you're working on?
I just started a #MeCare campaign with my community, and that's about self-care. I've realized that just going through the book launch, I've completely missed that part, and just listening to my body and how exhausted I was without realizing it because I was running on adrenaline. It was a huge aha moment to really slow down. And you know what, Josh? I'm taking 2 months off.
I love this #MeCare. It's so primal sounding, actually. MeCare. And the reason why this is such a big deal is because you do a lot. You serve a lot of people. Hundreds of thousands of people are being affected by you every single month. How do you take care of yourself? What is your number one self-care practice?
I think the biggest one right now, because as my business has grown and name has the book has opened up a lot of opportunities. I think the biggest thing for me right now is saying no to things.
Yeah. Saying no is so powerful. Many times that's come up on the podcast. And there's something so healthy. There's a healthy boundary that you've established when you say no.
Yeah, because then that frees up your time for the things that you have to, you want to say yes to, but you never because in the space we're in, we thrive on helping other people, right? I mean, I thrive in getting those emails saying, just how women how it's completely changed their lives, right? But then when you do that, it's kind of like an addiction, and that comes at a cost of taking care of myself, and that has to change.
Last question for you today. This intersection of physical and emotional. There's also the spiritual. What is wellness to you? How would you define, Magdalena, wellness?
I'll go back to what we said right at the beginning of the interview, and that is my body is sending very clear signals all the time, and just allowing to listen to that and say, you know what, like I will ask myself on a regular basis, like, what do you need? And the body will tell me, and just listening to that and honoring that is my biggest thing right now.
Well, I just want to honor you, this clarity, this permission to slow down, this cooking for balancing our hormones, living in a way that the creator, that God, that higher intelligence, whatever you believed, put us on the planet for. Thank you so much. I want to acknowledge you for what you do, the contribution that you make to wellness, and also the thresholds that you've gone through in the wellness warrior that you are. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Josh. You were a wonderful interview, I have to say.
Well, hey, look, I really care about what I do, and our audience deserves this, right? They want to know where can they actually get the tools that will affect them in the positive ways that they deserve. And also, by the way, too, I want to talk about your quiz, hormonesbalance.com quiz. This is where people can start. So go to hormonesbalance.com/quiz. We'll also link this in the show notes. But what a joy to connect with you, Magdalena, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
Hey, my friend, thank you for hanging out and growing with me on today's show. Remember to hit subscribe, share this podcast with somebody you care about that you think gets to hear this message. Support the show by leaving a 5-star review for the podcast right now, simply by tapping on your show artwork on your iPhone. Click that purple link that says review this podcast. It helps the show reach more conscious and smart people like you, and your voice will attract more world-class guests that want to come on the show. So let them hear your voice. For all the downloads, videos, links, and free resources mentioned on the episode, go to wellnessforce.com/radio. And while you're at my house on the web, join us in the Wellness Force community newsletter on that page, and I'll send you 4 free guides around staying healthy with your eating, moving, and sleeping while you travel. But don't let this conversation stop here. Join a group of people like you over at the Wellness Force community Facebook page. This is where we talk about the things that really matter. We share our wins, inspirations, struggles, and a lot more. So join us, tap on the show artwork on your phone, and hit that purple link that says join the Facebook group, and I will welcome you at the door. Okay, now you get to go out into your world and create impact for the people that you care about. So until I see you again real soon, I'm wishing you love and wellness.